I'm going to show you how to make a mask in the way that I have interpreted a couple of patterns, because the ones I've looked at are either like too wide or too tall, or the elastic doesn't fit, and a lot of the ones that are molded to the face aren't tight enough at the bottom and the top, and they're less likely to fit as many people. So this is a version of like the accordion shaped regular ones. So I did have one medical mask at my house, and I measured that to see how big it was. It was essentially a square that was 7 by 7, but a pattern I had been using was 9 by 9. So I chose to do 8 by 8, and that seems to be the best measurement. So I cut out a bunch of 8 by 8 squares. This is all 100% cotton, and I washed it and dried it first to shrink it and to kind of sterilize it and get any chemicals off of the fabric. Because they will be sanitized, and if you don't pre-shrink the fabric, they will be shrunken when they get sanitized and they won't fit the same. So after I washed them, they got pretty wrinkled. So I did some ironing on them just to make them workable, because if you donate to the hospital, they will likely sanitize them before they use them, so they will get washed again. So it doesn't have to be perfectly ironed or anything. The fabric that I'm using on the back is a muslin fabric. It's just 100% cotton. It's really soft once you wash it. It's a little more stiff before you wash it. And so it'll be soft on the face, but it's also not using the pattern on the back, so that whoever's wearing them knows like what side was on their face and what side wasn't, so they don't flip it around and put the germy side on their face. Elastic, I'm using this really thin elastic that I found. It was actually what was basically the only thing left in the fabric stores, because all of the thicker stuff had been bought out. But what I'm finding is that the thicker, like 1/4 inch elastic, which most people are using, is definitely uncomfortable behind the ears for wearing for a longer amount of time. So it kind of defeats the purpose of making a more comfortable mask if a nurse is wearing it for like 12-hour shifts. So this thin elastic, when you sew it in, I don't want it to like pull through. So I did a couple knots on the end, and I did like a bunch of them. The original cut was 8 inches, and then I tied the ends like 3 times each, so they're all about the same length, and they're super comfortable behind the ears. So one pattern that I was reading said that you should use a non-directional fabric so that you don't have to worry about making the lines correct. It's a lot easier to get a square when the fabric is directional like this, because you just measure and cut along a line. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just line up the fabric, right sides facing in, and just give it a couple of pins so it doesn't get all wonky when you sew it together. So what you want to do first is just sew what will be the top of the mask. It doesn't matter what side because it's a square, but keep in mind that it's a top. And do a little back stitch here. And now you're going to want to pull out the elastic. You're going to open up your fabric. It helps if you lift your foot up. And pull it in as tight as you can here, up to the needle. And pull the knot in as close as you can so that the elastic can be held as long as possible, because the elastic theoretically can be tightened, like someone can tie a knot in it if it's too big, but if it's too small, it's just uncomfortable and there's nothing really you can do about it once it's all sewn. And so now you're going to sew over the elastic and all the way down to the bottom, but you want to make sure that the elastic is out of the way so you don't go over it. And once you get to the bottom here, this is where it gets like a little more finicky, is you have to reach in, grab the elastic, and pull it down here to the bottom, because this side it has one ear loop, so it has to loop all the way around. And also helps if you lift the foot. Again, pull it in as close to the knot, as close into the needle as you can. Put your foot back down and sew over that. So here you're going to want to back stitch and actually close it off instead of going all the way around the bottom. And that is because when you reach in and grab the elastic, if the bottom's already sewn, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So it helps if you do the top, one side, and start where you started at the top, do that side as you sew in that elastic, and then go back across the bottom to finish it off. But what's important is that you leave one little opening. It's often easy to forget to leave the opening, just leave a small one. so you can turn it inside out. As small as you can make it, but being able to still turn it inside out. So when you go back up to the top here, just do a back stitch to secure it. So lift the foot, put in the elastic, and it definitely is pretty finicky, but I guess it's easier to sew if you're using this thicker elastic because you can just pin it in there, but it is a lot more comfortable. So just sew up that edge, stopping at the bottom. So my foot likes to get stuck on the elastic here. Just pull on the elastic knot. So when you get to the bottom there, right before you get all the way down to the bottom, reach in, find that elastic, pull the bottom knot back through, lift the foot. And you can sew up the bottom, but leave the space at the end so that you can turn it inside out. It's really important to do the back stitch there because when you're turning it inside out, that is going to come undone, and you want it to be extra secure since you're going to be pulling on that area. After trimming all the extra strings, just to make the mask a little more smooth, being careful of the knots, you don't want to cut those out. If you want to trim the corners, trim the edges at all if you have a large seam there. But once you get to that space that you left to turn it inside out, don't cut those seams. Leave those seams as long as you can, because when you flip it inside out and you want to sew it back up, if there's no seam there, it's going to be really difficult to turn them in and sew it. And also remember, it doesn't have to be super pretty, especially if you're new to sewing. Anyone is just appreciative to have these masks if their hospital or nursing home or whatever it may be is running out of supplies. They'll really appreciate anything that you can make for them. So anything you can do to make it more comfortable or easier to sew for yourself is all good, but don't panic about making it the most beautiful thing that you can do. And then to sew up the end is you're going to tuck in these seams that you left. You just turn them in, and then you're going to use your machine just make it as good as you can, especially since we'll be pleating it. The edges aren't going to be as visible. And so what some people were doing, and what I did for the first couple that I made, was put in some sort of wire, but my wire was kind of spinning in there, and my needle hit the wire a couple times, and you don't want to break your sewing machine needle. I think that if you make it well enough and the elastic is tight enough, it doesn't really matter if you have the wire in there. It's definitely up to you if you feel like that is something that you want to do. If you put it on and it doesn't feel tight enough around the nose, you can definitely add in some wire. Before I sewed up the edge after I turned it inside out is I slid in some wire that was about this long, and I lined it up there, and I kind of just sewed a box around there to keep it as steady as I could. As close as I could to the wire was the best. And at the end of the wire I did kind of like a loop so that it wouldn't stab anyone in the face. Some people are using twist ties. I don't know who has twist ties in their house. But yeah, if you're going for efficiency, it's not really the most important aspect of the mask. So this is one of my first masks that I made. I modeled it off of the regular medical mask sort of pleating. I found that it was the most effective for stretching out over the face, not making it bulky at the bottom or the top. This one is a little messier because it was like my first one of this version. It does have the wire in there, but it does spin a lot, so it's really difficult to straighten out. And it also potentially could get rusty in the wash if it's getting a bunch of washes at a hospital, nursing home, whatever. So it's at this stage that some people might want to iron it out. I think that it's okay just for efficiency. If you just want to even out the sides as much as you can press them out. And then you're going to want to try to bend in the pleats. So the first one is going to be as close to the center as you can do it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going to want to fold in. It's really just about eyeballing it. Fold it in like a bit, like that much. And you are gonna wanna pin that in place. And this is where I also feel like the directional fabric comes in handy because you can line them up a little more and it's not gonna be all wonky when you sew it together. That's the first part, and then you're gonna wanna do the same thing, maybe like an inch, about an inch further down. And so you should theoretically have about the same at the top as you do at the bottom in between the pleat. I have a little more, but you can always modify if it comes out not having the right amount at the end. So for the next pleat, you're gonna wanna do, if you wanna compare, a little bit out, you're just gonna wanna pleat it right there and on the bottom as well. Maybe bend it into the first pleat that you made. And you want to make sure that you're also folding the back fabric in. It's easy for them to get separated. I guess if you iron it, it would help a little bit, but you are only sewing up the edges. So as long as it's matched up on the edges, that's all that's important. It's not going to be perfect right now. Another thing is if you do iron this out, be careful about the elastic. I saw one person was like, don't iron over the elastic, it might melt. So depending on the type of elastic that you have, don't spend too long ironing over these little knots. This is where my machine has a bit of trouble going over the elastic at the end to get going and some over the pleats. When you start to go over the elastic knot, you can just pull up there to push it along through. Keep in mind that both genders will be wearing these masks. You want to make sure it's 100% cotton. That has been shown to stop the most droplets and to be the most effective in comparison to the real surgical masks. But it is really important to shrink it because it makes it tightly woven. It's like more tightly woven than it was before, which will help make it more effective. But also, again, since they're going to be sterilizing them and washing them in whatever facility you give them to, you want them to not get deformed. Then you're gonna have the finished mask, and if you want you can iron it, but like I said, if you give it to any sort of hospital or nursing home or anything, they are gonna sterilize them before they give them out to people, so your ironing might come out. So if you feel like it's not worth your time, it might not be. So this is how it looks on, and you just stretch down the bottom. There isn't anything really gaping. I feel like it fits pretty well. It doesn't even really need the wire on the nose. It's pretty tight to my face. And the elastic seems to be just the right length. I feel like it could have a little more give for someone that has a bigger face. And if someone has a smaller face, I don't think it's going to be gaping.